Going live now. And it says we've gone live, so that's really good news. So good afternoon to you, Graham. We're going to kick off this live streaming. I'm going to ask you to tell me a little bit about yourself and why you're so passionate about road safety.
Well, good afternoon to you, and it's great to be with you. I suppose I've been involved in this work now for well over 40 years.
Yep.
Starting my career back with Worthing Borough Council, then West Sussex, and then became County Road Safety Officer for Northamptonshire. I got plucked out of that role by the Institute of Advanced Motorists, who asked me to be their head of road safety. Really as the result of a partnership approach, because one of my county responsibilities nationally was to look after third-party organisations. And that was always a difficult choice that one had to make about what third-party organisations could best do the work for road safety. And the advanced driving IAM were one of them, driving instructors were another. I needed to get to people who had a face with the population. And so I had that quite close relationship with the IM, and they were seeking to have a head of road safety. And they asked me if I would like to take the appointment on, which I did do. I suppose alongside of that, I was also running an organisation called AIRSO, Association of Road Safety Officers. That was something I was asked if I would be interested in doing when I almost first got to Northamptonshire. And we had a very good profile in Northamptonshire, where the director was always very keen that people got involved in the national scene. I mean, he himself had been president of IHT, as it was at the time, now the Chartered Institute, of IHE, and all those various things that he'd been involved in. So he was keen that his staff should do things of that nature. And so I ran AIRSO there. And when I went to the IM, it was conditional on the fact that they would give me some time to also continue with AIRSO. And there was a good partnership between the IM and AIRSO. And then AIRSO got, quite frankly, so big that AIRSO said to me, "Hey, Graham, you know, what about running this and we'll give you some money to do it?" And it suited my circumstances at the time. And so I left the IM and set up my own consultancy, in which part of my work was to run AIRSO. And I gave that up in 2015, actually, after 25 years. The organisation, from my point of view, had run its course. I was, you know, stagnating because it needed new purpose, it needed new ideas. I wasn't the person to deliver that. And I think I'd done it for long enough, and I wasn't doing the organisation any good, really. Now, of course, that's become the Association for Road Risk Management. It's been completely revamped, and I'm still a member of that, of course, at the same time. But I've inherited a few other things of late, I suppose, or I say of late now, of a few years. I chair the UK Road Safety Committee, which is underpinned by ROSPA, and I obviously chair the Institute of Master Tutors of Driving, which I'm very enthusiastic and keen on. And then run my own consultancy. And my idea of running my own consultancy is I publish a newsletter once every month. In fact, the April edition was published at about 11 o'clock this morning. And so that was the end of that. And then we went from there to being running a few conferences around the country, with the idea that I do the travelling and I'd run these conferences on a local basis to do with road safety for a lot of people. And I've got some accreditation there that provides CPD for various bodies, particularly in the highway construction industry, which helps. So I've always had this passion for road safety. I've never seen it as a 5-day-a-week job, which of course it's not. I've never sort of got to Friday and said, thank God it's the weekend, because to be honest with you, road safety carries on at the weekend. I've never thought Monday morning, oh my God, it's Monday morning, back to work. Everything has rolled in to one, because you're dealing with the public and the people that's going on 24/7 and into the evenings, etc. So I'm very enthusiastic to see the number of road deaths and injuries reduced on a regular and annual basis. And over the years, of course, we've seen that.
Yeah, no,
Hopefully,
been good.
hopefully through some of my efforts and other people of my nature, but also through the way we've developed our road system, the way we developed our vehicles.
Okay, so just to sort of clarify, that's quite a good pathway. We can see where your career's been. So now, could you just give me a bit of clarity about what exactly your role is now? Because I know you do something maybe with the ADI and JC, IMTD. Where are you now? What are you up to?
What I'm up to now is, well, I chair the National Road Safety Committee, which is underpinned by ROSPA.
Yeah.
That's a committee made up of a lot of the major organisations in the UK, also includes the Department for Transport, the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government. We look at the proposals that are coming out of their various governments. We look at the various policies which we should have to stand by and stand behind. And we will meet on 3 times a year, generally, of course, around a table, but for the last year, it's been, as you would imagine, online. It's well attended, it's well supported. I've been in that seat now for probably about 6 or 7 years, and I enjoy that very much. Alongside of that, I am chairman of what is known as the Institute of Master Tutors of Driving. I describe the Institute as a body of very experienced driving trainers and instructors who are doing a broad range, for the most part of it, of driver tuition. So they are doing learners, they're doing fleet work, they're doing specialist work, they're doing driver rehabilitation courses, etc. And my involvement with them really started because I was asked to go and be one of their speakers.
Okay.
And I went to be one of their speakers, and I was then approached about whether I'd be prepared to join. And it was an interesting scenario because I looked around the table and I thought, some of my members are here who I particularly am very keen on from AIRSO, and it gives me an opportunity to meet with them. And that was good in its own way. And I thought, I can go and be a member of this organization and I don't have to do anything. I don't have to lead anything because everything I got involved in up to that time, I found myself not exactly running, but being quite instrumental in the organization of it. Well, I hadn't been there very long before they then tried to put my arm up my back and said, would I be prepared to become the member of their executive? And I turned it down the first year, but I thought, well, if I do it, it's out of the way, because at that time, 3 years and you were out.
Okay.
And then I'd only been on it a year and the deputy chairman resigned. And the deputy chairman, having resigned, I was all looked at and they said, would you do it? And I said, well, okay, I'll do this job. I'm going to become chairman as a result of that, because that's usually what happened.
Yeah.
It wasn't constitutional in that way, but that was the general progression. And the current chairman only had a year to run. So I only spent, a year as the deputy, became chairman, and I thought 3 years and out. And after I'd been doing it for 2 years, the question was raised as to why there was a bar on the length of time a chairman served, because it was the only office in the organization where there was a bar. And to cut a long story short, they removed the bar in 2 different goes. And so I've now sat as chairman of that organization for 7 or 8 years as well. And I do enjoy it very much.
I'll come back to that probably a little bit later, I think, because I want to ask a bit more about, and I want to come back to it about how ADIs can get involved if they want to be involved with that. But I'll come back to that later. I want to bring you back to road safety, because I think we would agree that over the last 10 years, KSI, killed and seriously injured figures, road crash, it's all a bit stagnated. We haven't actually shifted a lot. We did really well up until then, but in the last 10 years, not been a huge shift. What's your view now, though, on the current situation with road safety? Because, you know, I want it to come back, but obviously it's had a back burner to the pandemic. But we need, as being our industry, we need to bring it back to the fore again.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that goes on in road safety, and we always have to be careful how we just look at the figures, and we don't, because we need to understand what sits behind each of those figures. We are very hung up on the number of people who are killed in the country, which is a real pain in the neck, because there are a lot of people who actually are very seriously injured and have life-changing injuries, which don't necessarily figure so much in our mind, and yet are often more horrific than, if I dare say it with care, if they didn't survive. But we're stuck with 1,700 plus people who are killed on the roads in Great Britain. That's been the case since we got to the 1700s back in about 2012. And we don't seem to be dropping very much with regard to that. That concerns a lot of people.
Do you think that the reason it hasn't dropped because engineering has gone as far as it can do for the time being, because we still have a human behind the wheel, and that cars are as safe as they reasonably can be, and vehicles are as safe as they reasonably can be, and obviously, you know, there's some road engineering what still could be done, but that's a massive cost, you know, with road engineering to take, you know, to maybe straighten out roads, you know.
I wish we had the answer to that question in a way, because whilst we see the deaths not moving, we do see the serious injuries and the slight injuries falling off.
Yep.
We do recognize, and one of the things that actually we've recognized in my career, which is the most obvious thing to recognize, is that drivers do make mistakes.
Yep.
Now, we're still at the level, I'm afraid, where when drivers make mistakes, we wag the finger too much at them, I believe, instead of saying, well, yeah, you know, no one set out to make that mistake, but unfortunately, you know, someone's going to have to be blamed for making that mistake. We've done an awful lot, I think, in education in terms of taking hold of the drivers who do make errors, who need their skills revised and honed in on by things like the driver improvement scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to pause you there, because do you think, and I know road safety generally has been, do you think that's a reactive approach more than a proactive approach?
Well, yeah, I mean, the world is changing, because what I was going to move into is the fact that we now look at road safety, particularly with regard to what we call a safe systems approach.
Yep.
Which tries to bring and coordinate things together, such as, you know, making our roads and our roadsides safer to mitigate against the mistakes, to lessen the injuries that are caused. So we've seen things on the sides of roads like moving lampposts and post boxes and telegraph poles where we still got them from the curb edge back to the hedgerow, which is very important. We've seen a lot of decluttering of signs which don't need to be there because they're on poles, which cause problems to people. We do have an issue on rural roads where we've got a lot of trees, because trees don't give. And if you try and take them out, you'll have the environmentalists after you. So we're somewhat stuck with those, and we never build roads now with trees so close to the edges. But we are putting sort of more Armco, both in wooden structure as well as metal structure, around that to deflect people. So we're trying to make our roadsides safer. We're trying to make our vehicles safer, but we've done an awful lot in that direction. I think we've got to be very, very careful with the modern technology that's going into cars, which is now making drivers have to operate a screen. You know, all the adverse things we have about looking at a screen, and here we are now encouraging people to look at a screen.
Well, some vehicles don't have mirrors anymore. They've got screens, haven't they?
That's right. Yeah, you push it. You don't just push a button to turn the fan or your heater on now. You push a button to find an instruction that says heater, to find another instruction which says, and then you've got to slide your finger up it. And I mean, there was an estimation that, you know, it can take you your eyes off the road for 17 to 20 seconds whilst you're doing that. Now, you imagine traveling at 30 miles an hour, you're covering an awful lot of distance whilst you are actually looking at a screen. And it's a different skill, to be perfectly honest with you, looking at the road and looking at a screen. And unless you're tuned into the fact that you've got to keep on that, it's very easy just to concentrate on the screen until you've got what you want. So we've got to be careful that we don't go over the top with that and take all the advantages that technology brings and all the advantages that we've saved in making the cars safer in putting in something which actually is causing a problem to operate.
Adding more distractions into the vehicle, you know.
That's right.
Yeah, and we can't divide our tasks. You know, we're humans. We can only do one thing at a time. And, you know, there's enough divided attention in driving a car, let alone in operating Starship Enterprise.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, you know, that's what happens sometimes when I get in my car. It is Starship Enterprise. It's not a car in that respect. You know, there's so much, you know, if I want to know about the vehicle status, I can go into that while driving. I'm looking at computer screens, giving you all that sort of information. I think especially if you're probably inexperienced, I won't just say young, but inexperienced, that's overload.
Yeah.
And how much training, you know, and I'm not blaming driving instructors here, but how much training has gone on into using that technology?
Well, it's not gone on. And I know that from the experience of buying a new car 3 years ago, which was a significant difference between the car I'd had for the previous 4 in the way it's developed. And to be perfectly honest with you, the person who sold me the car didn't know how to operate a lot of the things themselves when I was asking. And in fact, to be honest with you, secondly, what he did tell me was almost information overload because I'd never experienced it before. So, you know, there's an awful lot of management to go on. And I know people like the Institute of Advanced Motorists, which I have quite a lot to do with still, have been saying, you know, we don't train our salesmen sufficiently and well enough to actually impart the information they need to impart about the cars which they're selling. They could just tell you what it does. They don't know how to do it.
I get this in the, you know, in the fleet market with vehicle familiarization. You know, I work with a company that, say, for example, might have 50 vehicles. They're not all the same. You know, they're not all the same. You get out of one and get in the other. Well, if you haven't driven the other, you know, adjusting the seat can be what? You know, how do I do this? You know, can you put the heat, you know, and these are limousines, can you put the heating on in the back? How do I, you know, just simple stuff that you think, oh, I've got in to drive it. And then you've got 4 people in the back and someone goes, oh, can you turn the heating up? And you're like, what, where, how? It's not straightforward, you know, and I think we need to be aware of this, that vehicle familiarization is really important. It's not something that is probably done very much at L driver standard. No, because you drive one type of vehicle.
Well, that's right. You not only that, but of course, you know, there is equally a case in education of not doing information overload all in one go. Which is why, you know, the driving task is not just a learning to drive 5-minute wonder. It's a lot longer than that.
No, absolutely.
But if I could take you back to that safe systems approach, because I just wanted to finish off by saying that the next arm of that safe systems approach is the road user themselves. And there are 3 particular areas, and this goes back to the question of where we can make the big impacts, I think, in casualty reduction. The big impacts of the fact that we are still killing 260 people a year where there's a driver who's over the legal limit. You know, a straightforward, simple, basic communicated message about what the legal limit is. And that doesn't take into consideration, of course, drink is a problem. It doesn't just have to be to the legal limit, but if we could just deal with the legal limit people, we'd be well off. We still have a problem with people not wearing seatbelts, which are accounting for 230, 240 odd deaths per year. And of course, we still have a problem with about 300 people who exceed the posted speed limit. yet alone those people who drive under this mythical title of inappropriate speed for the conditions, which there are,
Yeah.
whatever that might mean, because that will mean something entirely different to you than it does to me, given the situation.
Individual. Yeah. Individual interpretation.
That's right. So although you can still get the drunk, speeding, non-seatbelt wearing driver, if we added those three figures together, and we could probably halve our number of deaths on the road by just people abiding by the law, which are very simple to understand, far more simple than a death by careless driving or dangerous driving. Those other things are very, very simple. And we could make such an awful impact if we could do that sort of thing. And people responded to it.
I think, you know, I'm not going to mention coaching here because in my experience with coaching, there's a gap between the intended behavior, I will never drink and drive, and the actual behavior when I did drink and drive. Just on the one occasion, but it was the one occasion. And what we need to work with people is understanding that we know that you don't drink and drive every day. But when is that trigger? Where is that trigger? How would you deal with that trigger when it happens? Because you may have what you think is a legitimate reason to drink and drive, you know, and there isn't one, but you personally,
so. And that's an attitude problem that we're up against. We're up against the attitude problem then overall, that people do not believe that if they have a crash, they're going to be injured.
Yep.
Injuries happen to other people, crashes happen to other people, and therefore, we have that problem to deal with individuals, trying to make them realize that it's not just going to be okay.
So where do you think, because I've looked at some of the safe system, and I've just looked at the one in Scotland, and there wasn't a mention of driving instructors in that report. Where do you think driving instructors can fit in better with road safety?
Well, I mean, I have a personal view, and I think you'll find that personal view is the same with people who are in my role, that driving instructors are key players. Then they are road safety officers wearing a badge with maybe a specific purpose, but they ought to have a much more inbuilt system within their mind that they are more than just someone who conveys a practice of learning to drive. I mean, I often say to you, there's a difference between teaching someone to drive and teaching them to be a driver.
Yes.
Which are two different things. I mean, I was taught to drive the car, having never driven a car before, in what I would say to you was probably about an hour and a quarter. From the moment that he took me outside, he put me in a car, into the driver's seat. We didn't spend an hour on a cockpit lesson. He said, I'll tell you about A, B, C, and D. I'm not going to bother with the windscreen wipers. Now it's not raining. I'll worry about that when the time comes. I'm not going to tell you how to put the heater on because it's not misting up the windows at the moment, and it's not cold, because I don't want to tell you too much in one go, because I want you to know how you're going to be set. And within when he told me how to start the car up, and within 30 feet, I had to turn left. And then within about a few more feet, I had to do a right from a main road into a side road. And not very far down the road, I had to go round a roundabout. Admittedly straight on round a roundabout, but it was, and I can remember that first lesson, and I can remember exactly where I went. And when we went out the second day, we reversed round a corner and we turned the car around in the road, and we went on a slope, and we started off from a slope. The only thing that I'd not done, bearing in mind it was a long time ago now, the only thing I'd not done in learning to drive in terms of the list was actually an emergency stop. And he actually taught me my emergency stop the hour before I did my driving test. Would you believe, in exactly the same road that it was actually done in?
No surprise. No surprise at all. So yeah, so just coming back to that, what can us as driving instructors, how do we get involved? Because I just feel we're missed out the loop sometimes.
I think it's very easy to say that, and it's very easy to go to a group of driving instructors and say, really and truly, you ought to be thinking a bit broader than what you're doing. There will be some people who are very good at doing that, and there will be some people, I'm sad to say, who see going and meeting a pupil, teaching them to drive, hopefully in so many lessons, putting in for a test and passing, reputation reliant on the fact that they can say they've got 100% pass rate, which eventually, of course, they always will, because whether it's the first time that someone's passed or not, or beyond that, all their pupils pass. And they'll start at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and they'll finish at 5, 6 o'clock at night. They don't belong to any associations or anything of that nature. They don't pick up all this information that they may be getting, and as a result of all that, they can't. They don't do any more. Now, that is a part of the animal that we have to deal with at times. Excuse me one moment.
Okay, I'll let you deal with that.
Yeah, it's the blessed phone that keeps ringing. You know what? My phone hardly ever rings.
No, but I know they're going. You're on telly, Graham. What are you doing on telly?
I've unplugged it now.
Yeah, good man.
And so we've got to get a message across at the very early stage of when people become driving instructors. It's not just solely about this. That will give them a lot more respect with the people who are actually wanting to do more. Now, there are people who will say, well, I'm not paid to do these other things. The people and the pupils don't want these other things. You are the teacher. You are the person who should be teaching them what they need and what they should need to know. And I don't hold with this stuff that they don't want to know that. I know it's the difficult stuff that they might not be so keen on knowing about, but we've got to have a sea change, I think, in the mindset of what learning to drive is all about. And it's not
absolutely. I think that is, it's there in the DVSA standards, it's there in the syllabus, but actually having those standards maintained and upheld on a driving lesson is down to an individual.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think maybe that stems all the way back to our training to become a driving instructor. Because if we look at our training to become a driving instructor, do you think that should change? Because basically, if you've got a pulse, you hold a clean driving license, you pass your DBS, you do get through parts 1, 2, and 3, anyone could be a driving instructor. Do you think there needs to be a change at that level?
Yes, I would. I would support a change at that level because, let's be fair, if I want to be a teacher in a school, which was actually, before I went into road safety, was the chosen path I was going to go on. I had to not only pass certain exams, but forget that bit. I was interviewed to make sure I was initially up to the standard. I would have been mentored going into schools. I would have been taught at different stages. They would have either said you can carry on or you can't carry on because you're not up to it. There are good drivers who are crap at teaching. There are good teachers who are crap at driving. Perhaps I shouldn't use that word, but let's
do used it now twice.
And it's a bit like I did an awful lot of stuff with emergency service drivers in the past. And one of the things we always had with emergency service drivers is because a police driver is good at driving, it meant that he could teach it. Now, in fact, it doesn't work like that. Teaching is an art, or coaching is an art, whichever way you want to approach the words. I would actually make it. I'd have some sort of screening at the beginning to make sure that these people had a mindset towards teaching people and not, oh, here's a good way to make money. I mean, we've got a drop at the moment in the register of ADIs because a lot of people over this last year have decided that they were going to retire, but they've now retired earlier, or they're not going to carry on because they had to find something else to do, or they think it's still too much of a risk. But what's going to happen is that they're going to be replaced, because they'll be replaced by a lot of people who've been made redundant, who think, oh, I can drive, I'll go and become a driving instructor. And the system allows that to happen with nothing else before, to find out whether they've got the aptitude to teach. So really and truly, the most important part of being a driving instructor is that you're able to train and teach people. If you went to a teacher training college, you'd have to prove that you could teach. They'd spend more time teaching you how to teach than they would the subject that you were going to teach. That's secondary almost. And I think that is the approach that we'd be far better adopting with where we are now. And then in the first year, we have some sort of mentor system, a bit like teachers get. You know, newly qualified teachers get mentored for a year. Just let
that would change the cost.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't mind whether it changes the cost. To be perfectly honest with you, I don't get why driving instructors think they're not valuable. You know, they charge. You know, so they say they've got to do 7 or 8 pupils a day, because they actually don't do the maths and work out that if they actually did charge at a reasonable rate, they could do 5 pupils a day, earn the same amount of money, have less expenses because they haven't got to pay for those other 3 hours to run the car. But it doesn't seem to be in the psyche. If I charge more, the chap down the road will charge less, and I won't get the pupils. At the moment, there are so many pupils there that now's the time for driver trainers to rack their prices up. And to be honest with you, you know, 35 to 40 pounds an hour ought to be a driving lesson. I was always taught, and it seems to sound.
But there is a lot now who are in that bracket. That has shifted.
I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad. Someone taught me that a driving lesson it's good to break down what you charge in a driving lesson into 3 groups of a third. A third is what it costs you to run your car. A third is what it costs you to run your business, and a third is what it costs you to live. Now, you know, some of those people, when they divide their thirds up, don't earn the minimum wage.
Yep, no, absolutely.
And that's a stupid thing to be in. And what we've learned over this period of time is there ought to be almost another third, if you like, if you can make 4 thirds out of 1, of a contingency plan. You know, what happens if we get this again? Where's my contingency?
Basic, I mean, and this is not always possible in business, but basic business says, look, you do your figures, you do your third, and then you add 20% on top.
Yeah.
Because that's your contingency plan. That covers those other things you haven't covered.
Yeah.
And then, you know, because instead of earning a wage, you should run a business and make a profit.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. I want to bring you back, because I know you'd like to express this, and I think I'd like to get your opinion on this before we finish. Graduated driving licensing. What's your thoughts?
I think the word currently, the ideas that there are discredits the word graduated licensing, because the ideas, and I have to emphasize, they're ideas, they're not formal proposals, are all about restricting drivers when they have passed their driving test for X period of time. And I know, and I'll preface what I'm going to say beyond that. I know there's this major report, Driver 2020, which TRL are running, which is supposed to be looking at how we can help these drivers who are newly qualified to gain the experience, etc., and what interventions we can have. My great worry is that TRL have also done a report which they have advocated some form of restricted under the heading graduated licensing.
Yes.
Now, here we go. Why have they decided that some of the things like no driving at night, no passengers in cars for a certain period of time under a certain age, possibly, there's going to be some bits around the edges of all of that. that is based on where people are having crashes and coming unstuck in that age range.
Yep.
Well, I have to ask a driving instructor what he's doing about teaching people to drive at night, in the dark, on unlit roads, on lit roads. How does he teach them to actually cope with being dazzled by oncoming vehicles? How does he teach them to use their main beam and dipped headlight beam? And they will turn around to me and say, "Well, we don't go out at night and teach."
Yep.
Well, and I can't say that for everybody, but the majority won't. I went to a driving instructor group, and I put this to them. It was an local association, and they all put their hands up and said, "Of course we take our people out in the dark." And by the time we'd finished the discussion, it meant that they took their people out in the dark in the winter if they had a lesson between 5 and 6.
Yep.
Because we didn't go out in the dark, and it doesn't work. So not only do we not do it now, we're saying that we'll stop them doing for 6 months, and then they can start driving, and then we haven't given them any tuition.
No.
Waste of time. And the same thing applies to passengers in cars.
Yep.
You know, we don't, generally speaking, and you alluded to it earlier on, you learn on one car and one car only, which doesn't help, rather than going into different cars during a learning period. You then sit in a car with a driving instructor, no one else. The most likelihood of you having anybody in the back of the car under normal circumstances is when the instructor says, "Shall I sit in the back of your test?"
Yep.
That's the first time that they've ever had anybody in the back. The dynamic of the car has immediately changed, which doesn't help. And there's no conversation going on with people they don't know. Now, I mean, I think we therefore need to do some sort of education that surrounds the fact that, you know, when you're in a car, you do know this and I know this. If there are 4 people in the car, you're part of the conversation as well that's going on in the car as an experienced person. They need to experience that under supervision. And if we could have a driving instructor who would say, "Okay, as part of the deal we've got with you, at some point or another, for a couple of times, I'm going to take you out on a triple lesson. There are going to be 3 people in there. You've got to give up 3 hours of your time." We'll then build in the fact that you don't drive for 3 hours in the car. You get out and have a break.
Mm-hmm.
And when he's confident, and he's obviously got to concentrate on the person who's driving at the time, he introduces something which involves a discussion, and it also involves the driver joining in with that discussion whilst he's under supervision. Because, you know, it's all about the fact of being able to cope with more than one thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, a very good example of that really was when we decided, didn't we, to introduce independent driving based on the fact that people were passing a driving test and now suddenly had to think about where they were going as well as drive the car.
Yep.
Now that was a good sensible move what they did there, to be honest with you.
No, you know, and what it did is it made driving instructors review the way they taught.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and yes, and there's some good stuff around about that now. But so I am worried about what they might do in this so-called, in quotes, graduated licensing. I've been around some of these countries around the world. I have spoken to people in Australia and New Zealand when I was out there some 11 years ago. And I said, "Well, what's your road safety problem?" These were the government people. Yeah. And they said, "Oh, young drivers." I said, "But you've got a graduated licensing system." "Oh, yes," they said, "it's all right whilst the graduated licensing system's in operation, but once it's finished, we're back to square one."
Absolutely. I mean, how do people learn, you know, driving through experience? That's right. You know, it helps if that experience maybe has some guided and facilitation along the way as well. But generally speaking, if you don't give people the experience, how the hell are they ever going to learn?
So what I'd like to see really is I'd like to see driving instructors have some sign-off bits, you know, whether it be pre-test or post-test, it doesn't matter, but they have gone out and had X number of lessons at night. Yes. They've gone out and had a motorway lesson rather than this airy-fairy thing that we've got of, you know, if you can, but you don't have to. So we've got we've got a mixture here. If we consider motorway driving is very important, and it probably is now more important than it used to be with all the variations that we have in all lane running and controlled motorways, there should be a sign-off point there. It could be done post-test or pre-test. Sign-off point about carrying people in cars, and there probably will be a few other things if we think about it. They've talked for years about having people sign off the manoeuvres, so let's go a little bit further.
Well, actually, what you made me think of there is that, you know, on the day that someone starts their first driving lesson, that date, say it's the 26th of March 2021, they cannot take their test until the 27th of March 2022. That way they will have and they must have lessons in each quarter of the year. That way they would have experienced you know, different environments over the course of the year. It had a nice long learning period, and it would give them plenty of opportunity, and also the age would go up, which would help. The maturity factor would go up without raising the age of someone getting a license. It does raise the age of someone getting a license, and so we have other things coming in like the maturity of the frontal lobe, that sort of stuff. You know, we get another year. I don't think it's a vote winner, but I think it's, you know, forget that. Let's think about road safety. Let's take 12 months to learn.
Well, I think a minimum period, I think, will probably come out of the 2020 report that we've talked about, because that's being talked about. Well, it has been talked about a lot, but it's coming back again now. They're floating some of these things around. One of the big problems, of course, we've got is learning to drive with a professional driving instructor is not mandated.
No.
And that is one of our difficulties. If it was mandated, which of course, presumably if they make a minimum number of lessons like they've done in Ireland, then you would have to actually go to a driving instructor for it. But they don't want to make it at the moment compulsory learning by a professional. That's what we could do with doing. I mean, after all, you go to school on that basis, so why don't you go to a driving school on that basis? And I think we will go a long way by doing that, albeit that we do know that the majority of people do have some professional tuition anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Now that's really interesting. You know, this is all ongoing, and like, you know, both me and yourself have been in this industry quite some time now. Change is always slow.
Oh yeah.
Yes, it's always slow. And what concerns me is by the time we get round to any real change, cars will be more automated, more self-driven, and that, you know, what we're teaching people then will be how to fly a plane rather than how to drive a car, if that makes sense. You know, how to take over control in an emergency.
Well, that's right, and that's actually what a recent report, which was published by the RAC, was saying. You know, driver training will have to change because it is going to be more aligned to an airline pilot who's got all these dials in front of him and knows when he's got to step in and when he's not got to step in.
Yep.
Having said that, I think that there are people who say it's around the corner, but I'm afraid to say I think it's a long way off yet.
Yeah, well, cars are, you know, the car I'm driving now, I could drive that for another 15 years.
Yeah.
You know, who's going to make me buy an automated car in 2030, you know, that drives itself? It's not going to happen. You know, where am I going to get the funds from?
Yeah.
You know, so that will be the problems that people face. Okay, Graham, I want to finish this with one question, because I think I would like to see opportunities for driving instructors to get involved in expressing their views. And of course, they have the associations to do that. But I want you to tell me a bit more about how driving instructors can get involved with the Institute of Master Tutors and Drivers.
Well, to start with, the Institute is open to anybody who's a driving instructor or is very much akin to the driving instructor industry. I mean, I'm not a driving instructor. I've never been a driving instructor. I'm not an ADI. I know a lot about the driving instructor industry. I actually know not about the technical side of teaching people to drive. I would leave that to people who know. So we have a slightly broader membership than is purely ADIs, although the bulk of them are. And they are a group of people who we will put in the higher level of driver trainers who are enthusiastic about the extension to driver training beyond teaching mechanical skills, if you like to put it like that. They will incorporate some of the important things about drinking and driving and tiredness and distraction and all these sorts of things. And we encourage them to become a member of the Institute if they so wish. We don't let just anybody into the Institute. There is a process of...
You let me do a presentation.
Well, oh yes, presentation, yes. You gave a good presentation there. Now, whether we have you is another matter. No, they go through a process to become a member, which is to fill in an application form, is to fill in, give their CV, and they have to write a paper, not a long paper, a couple of A4 sides or as a minimum, about a driver training road safety matter. And when that's all submitted, they're then, I don't like the word interview, but they're met by the executive. And all the executive are present, but 3 people actually conduct a one-to-one with those people. It's always me as the chairman, and it's 2 other people. And we've got different roles in the framework of that. Someone would have looked more in depth at their paper, and someone would look more in depth at their CV. And we talked to them about it. It's not supposed to be confrontational. We don't argue with what they've written unless it is factually inaccurate, because everybody is entitled to opinion. But what we're actually looking for in that paper is people who have got a contribution to make for the benefit of themselves and for the benefit of other people. They've got a viewpoint, because we want people who are going to make a contribution. Because when we do look at things which come from government, as we do from time to time, that are specific to driver training, we don't want everybody to sit there and say, yeah, can't be bothered to read it. We want them to have read it, to have looked at it, to have thought about it. And it doesn't mean to say that at the end that their view will be the one that we go with, but there will be a collective collaboration there, and then we will make our response. And we also like to feel that the association is supporting them in terms of operating their business, and helping them in operating their business. I don't mean financially, but there are some very, very experienced people in there who run quite large driving schools and franchises, etc. It's also a body where, whilst we don't court the membership of these people, it happens to be that we've got the chairman of ADI and JC who's a member, the chairman of the MSA who's a member. We've got people who like the chief executive of Red Driving School is a member. There are some powerful people who sit there, not in that capacity, they sit there as individuals. Now, you obviously bring baggage with you when you come to these things, because you bring that background knowledge and experience of what's going on. And so it's a very, very useful group of people. It is not a big institute. The founding fathers saw it to be around about the 100 mark. It is knocking around the 80 odd mark. So there is room there. And, you know, we would welcome people to come along. Like a lot of organizations, whilst we've been online, we've allowed a lot of people to join in the meetings that we've had online, because a member usually introduces a new member. That's how it usually works. That person is allowed to come twice. At that point, they make up their mind whether they want to apply for membership or whether they actually say, no, it's not for me. And the reference actually is that you're brought by a member, because
Okay.
you know that gives us the reference, as it were, that they believe that you're the kind of person who we would like, or they would like, and would fit in with the body itself. So I don't want to make it too elitist in what I say, but it is carefully put together so we get the right high-powered minds sat round the table, and that does cause at times some pretty good argument, which I have to sit and try and arbitrate.
Yeah. So what's the institute's objective, apart from bringing these minds together to debate? Do they have an objective outside of that, an area of influence that they're trying to project?
I think we always have an area of influence that we're trying to project. I think the fact that we are independent of a trade association gives us a good role in doing that. The fact that we can portray to people that matter that we've got some very talented and experienced driver trainers there, that they are not there because it's good to be a member of this because I get cheaper insurance, or whatever it might be. I don't wish to be disrespectful in that remark at all, but we all know that the actual participation in these trade associations is not as high as the number of people, and we know that when it comes to their active involvement in it, they don't do, a lot of them don't do anything. They just take what they can get because it's cheaper to add their membership in and get this cheaper and that cheaper. We're not like that, you know, and people come along, not many people leave us. They usually stay. If they leave us, it's usually because they've retired. They get the opportunity to put at the end of their name their post nominals. They get their permission to use on publicity materials that they produce the insignia. And I do believe that the Institute has got a lot more work to do in trying to get its name and its position known out there, because I do describe it as probably the best kept secret in the driver training industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we're not known broadly. That has been a choice not to be known broadly, because it's not a badge collecting society, if you like. So I don't know whether I've sold it or whether I've undersold it, or whether I've put more people off than I've encouraged to join. But
the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, Graham.
That's right. It's up to people, really. You know, people will take it for what it is, or they'll say, I don't want to know. I want people to take it for what it is, but here we are.
Okay. All right. With that, I'm going to close the interview. So I'm going to come off Facebook Live. So thank you really very much for your time, Graham. It's been very, very interesting. So thank you very much. So I'm going to say goodbye to our live audience, and I'll have a brief chat with you in a moment.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.